The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death by an assassin late today.
They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck.
In the spring of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is shot and killed while standing on the balcony of a Memphis motel. A civil rights leader who believed in nonviolent direct action, his death would be a searing lightning bolt, striking numb the very message of nonviolent resistance he advocated. In cities across the country, his assassination would ignite centuries of pent-up racial tension into an explosive inferno of violence. An inferno that would reach the nation's capital. There, a small group of immigrants would be caught in the crossfire amongst frustrated mobs and responding military.
We couldn't take the bus home because of the riots.
Everybody was looting.
I remember seeing the flames, I remember seeing the smoke, and I remember hearing the noise. It was scary.
Chinese Americans who had immigrated to the United States a generation earlier, living in the shadow of the U.S. Capitol and a few blocks from the civil unrest's raging epicenter. What was it like for this first generation of Asian immigrants caught up in those fateful days? Neither black nor white, how did they negotiate a conflict deep-seated in their adopted homeland's painful past? This is their story.
My family worked on the railroads. Actually, my family has been coming back and forth from China, from southern China for many generations.
Chinese immigrants have been making Washington, D.C. their home since 1851, the year the first documented Chinese person registered an address on Pennsylvania Avenue. Their population remained low, as nativism, discrimination, and the related passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 severely limited the number of Chinese coming to the U.S. It was the first law directed towards excluding one particular ethnic group from immigrating into the U.S.
Back then, it was the Immigration Act in terms of a Chinese Exclusion Act that excluded Chinese women from coming in. I was told by my grandfather, he came over here from China. He came here on his own to establish a business. And then later he brought his family over, his wife, my grandmother.
In 1943, Allied relations between the United States and Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese government led to the lifting of the Chinese Exclusion Act.
My grandfather came in 1935, and he was in and out of the country until the exclusion laws were done away with. Then he brought my parents over and my siblings and my grandmother in 1949. People were desperate to come to the U.S. They wanted to get away from the poverty and the villages where they were limited. They were first attacked by the Japanese, then the communists took over. So they really were running away from oppression.
After World War II, a wave of Chinese immigrants began to move to D.C., either joining loved ones who were already established or charting a new course with the help of village networks carried over from their native country.
My father was born in China, Canton, China, and he came over when he was about 16 years old. My grandfather lived up here in the Washington area, and he had a restaurant in Chinatown. My grandfather put him to work right away.
I think like most immigrants, my dad came first, to start a living, find a job, a business, whatever, to establish himself. And then later on, he would bring my mother over.
Seeking out the familiar in an unfamiliar place, they banded together in an area that would become D.C.'s Chinatown. Earlier Chinese immigrants who had settled in Chinatown from 1900 to the 1930s had primarily come from Taishan, or Toisan, a county in China's Guangdong province. Through these old world networks, the majority of DC's Chinatown residents in the 1960s were Thai Shawnees.
My father came from the village of Toisan in southern China.
The Lee family, the Lee village in Toisan, a preponderance of them came to the Washington, D.C. area. And so through the village connections and the friendships back there, they just continued them when they moved to the United States.
Located 1 mile northwest of the U.S. Capitol, the heart of DC's Chinatown in the 1960s sat at the intersection of H and 7th Streets Northwest. It stretched from 5th Street and Massachusetts Avenue to 9th and G Streets Northwest.
The Chinatown that I'm familiar with was about maybe 6 to 8 square blocks. And 90% of my time, my world, other than school, was in those neighborhoods. We played in the alleys, we hung out at people's houses in Chinatown. We went to the stores where they worked in Chinatown, and when we had social events like CYC club dances, they were held at either Chinese Community Church in Chinatown or at one of the clubhouses in Chinatown, which basically was H Street. There were actually houses, row houses, people living there, small businesses that existed at the time, and there was at least 4 or 5 grocery stores, probably 10 to 12 restaurants, a couple American carryouts, obviously, furniture stores.
We were a community that was separated from the rest of DC. Most of the people in Chinatown didn't speak English. My parents didn't learn to speak English. And most of our customers were Chinese.
In 1968, of DC's roughly 778,000 residents, about 62% were African American, 36% were Caucasian, and 2% were Latino, Asian, or another racial group.
DC was predominantly black. Around that time, they had the first black mayor, Mayor of Washington, Walter Washington. So it was very interesting times, because then you had the Black Panther movement, you had the NAACP movement, and civil rights issues going on, and a lot of, for lack of a better word, a lot of blackness and black power. I was born in the 50s, but I recollect more of the 60s and the 70s.
Middle and working class African American families lived in neighborhoods like Shaw, the U Street Corridor, and Columbia Heights. Chinatown sat just south of these neighborhoods.
I'm from 14th and Webster Street in Northwest Washington, D.C. It was all black neighborhoods, but the stores were all owned by white people.
Chinatown, D.C. back then was within the community by itself. Beyond the Chinese community were black neighborhoods.
I was about 12 or 13 when I first went down to Chinatown. And it was interesting because I'm like, what is this doing? What is this part doing in the inner city? Because all around it, that was like the U Street Corridor where there was, Ben's Chili Bowl and all of that, man. And then he had this Chinese community. And I'm like, something ain't right about that. How did he even get here,
The only time we ventured out of Chinatown during that period of time was when we went to school. I went to elementary school, maybe about 10 blocks away. But when we started going to junior high and high school is when we started taking the bus to Jefferson Junior High in Southwest. And for high school, I went to Western High School in the upper part of Georgetown.
While Chinatown was home to many Chinese Americans, it also served as a broader cultural touchstone for those who lived beyond its borders.
My father had a laundry and dry cleaning business, 1408 North Capitol Street. It was in a predominantly African American, low-income neighborhood. We were somewhat isolated because there weren't many Asian Americans, well, not many Chinese Americans around.
We lived on North Capitol Street, and it was the northwest neighborhood, on the borderline of the Shaw neighborhood. And we went to Shaw Junior High. It was all black school.
We had exposure to Chinatown going there at least once a week. My father felt it was very important that we keep our Chinese roots and that we have exposure to other Chinese Americans. That was our our period where he felt we could let our hair down and be ourselves, be real Chinese then.
A minority living within a minority, these first-generation Chinese Americans had to learn to negotiate the albatross of race.
I didn't feel like I belonged, like an alien, like an immigrant. I was a first generation. I was born here. I was an American citizen. There was hostility. There was a lot of racial hostility during that time. I didn't belong to the African American community. I didn't belong to the Caucasian community. Being Chinese American was kind of frustrating at times because we weren't sure how to act. My parents wanted us to stay very Chinese, be a good little Chinese girl, but if you're going to survive in a predominantly African-American neighborhood in the city, you have to have some degree of assertiveness. And I had to learn how to fight, so I had to learn to survive.
Neither black nor white, they struggled to find their place in America.
There was always tension between blacks and whites. I always felt like we were in the middle and we kind of rode the fence. You know, we could go either way. I had black friends and I had white friends, and I always felt like we were kind of accepted by both sides.
I think with black people it was a lot harder for them because they had years and years of oppression. And I think it was a lot different for them because, you know, where I was asked to use the back door, they had to use the back door. I could go into Glen Echo Park and enjoy myself. They were protesting at the front gates.
Their own cultural identity would be challenged along the way.
Started around 1954 to 1955. That's when the schools were integrated. That's when a lot of things started to happen. My brother and I had two jackets. I had a blue one that looked like the Dallas Cowboy colors, and my brother Herman had one that's more like the Redskin color, maroon. On it was a football that said All-American. I was told in elementary school by one kid, he says, "You're not All-American." But according to me, I felt I was, because the movies and TV shows I watch, that's what I assimilated to. Fathers Know Best, Make Room for Daddy, Ozzie and Harriet. To me, I found in my eyes looking out, I'm an American.
I remember hanging around with some of my parents' friends, and they would make fun of us. They would say, "Chuksing." Chuksing is a word meaning empty bamboo, meaning I have no culture. I'm not Chinese, because I could barely speak the language. It kind of made me mad a little bit. I was just too busy trying to acclimate to the culture around us, because in the black neighborhood we grew up in, they made fun of us all the time. When we would go out, my parents would speak Chinese, and they would laugh at us. They would say to us, "Ching Ching Chinaman sitting on the fence trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. Ching Ching Chinaman, hit him on the head. Ching Ching Chinaman, he ain't dead." And then they would spit on the ground and step on it like that. I'm very proud now, put it that way. You know, but back then, growing up, I was not too happy about it. I wish I was white or black, you know, part of the main environment around me, because, you know, life was easier.
In April 1968, an explosion of strained racial tensions erupted on Chinatown's doorstep.
With the assassination of Martin Luther King, it was a big uproar in DC, and there were a lot of riots and burning of the city and a lot of looting. And we were caught in the middle while we were living in Chinatown.
I felt tension in the air, and I was wondering how it was going to affect us.
Just after 6 p.m. on the evening of Thursday, April 4th, escaped convict and outspoken racist James Earl Ray shot Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as King stood on the balcony of a Memphis motel. At 7:05 p.m., Dr. King was pronounced dead. As news of the civil rights leader's assassination spread, a group of students, led by activist Stokely Carmichael, gathered in one of DC's predominantly African-American neighborhoods at 14th and U Streets Northwest. Carmichael and others began to ask store owners to close early out of respect for Dr. King.
I remember coming home and we watched the news on TV about the shooting of Dr. King and that there were rioting.
When some did not, violence broke out.
My friend Lynn and I were on the bus coming from North Capitol Street. We could see down the street where the rioters were shoving another bus over sideways. So instead of stopping, our bus driver kept going. He didn't let us off until we were on 13th and New York Avenue.
All the business, were targeted, for looting. After they busted the window down, they would take TVs, clothing, groceries, anything they can get their hands on.
My dad had a laundry, so we had a big plate glass window, and I just remembered hearing a crashing noise at night, and somebody had thrown a brick through my dad's window. We were just kids. I was 18, and even though I was only 18, to have somebody throw a brick through your window was frightening. So, and we could look out the windows and we could see fires all up and down 7th Street. I mean, it was terrifying.
As store owners and residents caught in the fray, Chinese Americans found themselves negotiating race relations on a whole different level.
The riots lasted for approximately, probably about almost a week, but the first 2 or 3 days were very scary times.
I was in front of the St. Patrick's when the priests and the nuns were grabbing people off the street and pushing us into the church, that we needed to get off the streets, that there was rioting. So they kept us in the church until the police came and escorted me back to Chinatown. So I got back to Chinatown, and my father had locked up our grocery store and had the rest of the family downstairs in the, we have a basement grocery store. And we were watching looters run past our building.
It was very scary, and I remember that some of the customers who came into our laundry told my father about the riots, and some of them warned him about that he had to be careful. There were a lot of people throwing homemade bombs that they would throw into the stores, and we saw that. At nighttime, my father told us to stay in the back and stay out from the public, out from the front area.
A young lady came in and yelled at us saying, "We're going to burn you down." A neighborhood friend, male friend that my father knew, and Mrs. Costello both said something about you should put Soul Brother out in front and they shouldn't bother you. And that's what we did. We put a sign out in front saying Soul Brother.
And at first, Daddy was hesitant. He had an argument saying, well, I'm not black. Why would I put that on? And Mama said, put it on because we don't want anything to happen to the store. And that saved our laundry business.
My parents' grocery store was located in the Shaw neighborhood. The clientele are black, essentially all blacks. My parents were so close to their neighbors. My father's store was not touched. And as a matter of fact, he made his best business then. All the meat was sold from the meat case. He had to go out to the suburbs to buy bread, to bring it in to sell. So I think that has a lot to do with being part of the neighborhood.
The buildings around us were on fire, and there was a lot of smoke, and then they tear gassed us. We couldn't see in front of the building at all. There was just wall-to-wall tear gas. We lived upstairs on the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor, but our grocery store was in the basement. And we couldn't leave our building to go back upstairs because there was so much tear gas.
Worried for their lives and livelihood, some hunkered down.
As a neighborhood, as a community, we were very lucky because all of 7th Street behind us was on fire. There was a lot of looting and businesses were being robbed. But the neighbors on our 6th Street side were community people. They were neighbors that lived in row houses and apartment buildings and things like that. They came around the corner and they used soap and they marked our windows with a big white X. And they marked the fronts of our sidewalks with a big white X. And that was a signal to the looters and the rioters that we were okay and not to break our windows and burn us out. For the following week, there was a lot of National Guards around, and we were basically shut down. The entire neighborhood was just shut down for a week.
I happened to live in the next door to a liquor store, and once they busted the window, they looted all the beer and liquor out of there, and then they had the military people come. They threw gas bomb in the business, and since we live right next door to the business, right, we actually smelled the gas from the riots. Not much we could do, we just kind of hold our breath, you know, and close all the windows and try to do what we can to survive.
We got downtown and then everything was on lockdown. My mom said, get in the house, you don't want to go out. There's too many people out there doing crazy and stupid things. Well, my dumb self went around the corner, there was an Olympus sporting goods store. That was the store that sold gym uniforms to high school and junior high school people throughout the city. Well, there's a cop standing out there and kids were running in. People were running in and out of the store, grabbing stuff. And so I asked the guy, I said, what's going on? He says, well, if you're gonna steal something, go in and do not set it on fire. Do not set. So I said, okay, fine. I went in there, I grabbed a bowling ball, about 4 or 5 t-shirts, and about 4 or 5 pairs of socks. And I felt real good about it. I didn't think that it was wrong. I just thought it was something to do and keep up the crowd.
It didn't really scare me. I went out with my friends, and I hate to say that we participated, but I think the blacks they kind of identified with Chinese. I think their hatred was toward the whites. So we went down to the stores, and a lot of black people, they just handed us stuff, and we just took it home.
After 4 days of heavy rioting and a mandatory curfew, the violence subsided.
We did drive through 7th Street and saw the destruction. I saw the burnt out buildings, the windows broken, the black soot that was left from the smoke. Easily over a 2-3 mile period from approximately something like where Heck Company was in downtown Washington, D.C. on 7th Street, all the way further up towards the Shaw area, there was a lot of destruction.
I think I was surprised that it happened because I was not in touch with reality at that age. But the word on the street, and you would hear it on the buses and things, that it was planned, that they had just been waiting for an incident that would be an excuse for them to riot.
What people didn't understand was, like they said, man, they're tearing up their own businesses. Why would they do that? But what people didn't really know was some of those black businesses, they didn't own the stores. And so that was some of the venom or anger when people tore these stores down. They didn't see it as their stores.
Chinatown awakened to a changed city and an uncertain future.
My father was uncomfortable. He wasn't sure how to fit in. We didn't feel safe anymore. So he thought about moving to Maryland.
It was a future that would continue to push the boundaries of their community and their own identity, and for them, what it meant to be an American.
After the riots, a lot of people came to the realization that the riots hurt the communities and the people living in D.C. more than helping a situation. The H Street on this side, the communities got scared. People started moving out to the suburbs. We lost a lot of business. We lost a lot of neighbors. And Chinatown over the years has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller because we didn't have the business to sustain it once everybody started moving out to the suburbs.
I understand people's frustrations, and I understand the looting. They felt very strongly about what had happened that day, and they voiced their displeasure.
Well, we had to learn to accept each other more because we couldn't go through that again.
This is a period to assert yourself. The Black Power movement is saying something. This is a time of change. This is a time to understand ourselves and to say, we need to learn about our own history here. Isn't it time we need to understand what happened and why this happened?